So we will start.
We should start, yes.
On va commencer. Ça vous va si on commence? Bonjour à tous et à tous. Hello to everyone. First of all, just want to say that you have interpretation. So if you put a casque, because I'm going to speak in French, if you put a casque, you have the interpreter, and they can translate in English, it's number 2, French number 3, what else? German number 1 German, English number 2, French number 3, Italian number 4, and
Dutch
Spanish number 8, Spanish number 8, Portuguese number 9. So,
Greek.
and Greek also?
7.
7. No, there is no interpretation in Greek. Il n'y a pas d'interprétation en grec. Mais donc, normalement, comme ça, si vous mettez le casque sur vos oreilles, vous pouvez nous entendre dans la langue, dans votre langue, sans aucun problème. Et j'en profite pour remercier les interprètes qui nous permettent la tenue de ce type d'événement. Merci à vous. Votre travail est très important. Eh bien, bonjour. Donc, moi, je suis Leïla Chebi. J'ai l'honneur et le plaisir d'accueillir cet événement aujourd'hui qui est co-organisé avec Milagros Miceli qui est à ma gauche et avec Antonio Casilli qui est à ma droite et je les remercie beaucoup. Donc aujourd'hui, on tient un événement sur les petites mains qui existent derrière l'intelligence artificielle et je voulais vous dire d'abord que cet événement, eh bien, il s'inscrit dans une continuité, dans la continuité d'un travail que nous avons mené depuis plusieurs années, depuis 2019, ici au Parlement européen, sur les droits des travailleurs des plateformes numériques. Il s'inscrit dans une continuité, mais il se tient aussi à un moment charnière, à un moment où l'Union européenne est en train de cogiter sur la façon de réguler l'IA. La façon de réguler l'IA, et y compris la façon de réguler l'IA au travail et l'IA en lien avec les travailleurs. Donc, continuité d'abord, je le disais, parce que donc, nous avons une directive sur les travailleurs des plateformes numériques qui vient d'être adoptée. Et cette directive, ça a été le résultat d'un combat, d'une bataille menée au Parlement européen, menée également à l'extérieur du Parlement européen, une bataille qui a duré plusieurs années. Une bataille qui visait à reconnaître les droits des travailleurs des plateformes et faire en sorte qu'à partir du moment où ces travailleurs étaient subordonnés, devaient obéir à une plateforme numérique, eh bien, ils devaient avoir les droits de n'importe quel travailleur subordonné, c'est-à-dire d'un salarié. Ce combat, je vous le disais, il a été mené au Parlement européen. En tant que parlementaire, j'y ai participé. Mais il a été rendu possible, on a réussi à avoir une directive sur le sujet, une directive ambitieuse, que parce que les travailleurs, les principaux concernés, ont fait irruption dans la bataille, dans le chantier parlementaire. Et ici, c'est tenu, dans cette salle d'ailleurs, plusieurs forums transnationaux des alternatives à l'ubérisation, c'est-à-dire que c'est constitué au fil des années un espèce de contre-lobbying. Vous savez qu'ici, au Parlement européen, les lobbies sont très présents. On a fait une petite visite avant du Parlement, donc vous avez vu comment les représentants des lobbyistes sont présents, donc des intérêts privés. Et les citoyens, les principaux concernés, les travailleurs, on n'a pas l'habitude de les voir. Et là, parce que justement, il y a eu ce réseau qui s'est formé, qui a été puissant, de tous ces travailleurs de plateforme qui s'est constitué ici, ça a permis de faire pression et d'influencer le processus législatif et d'aboutir sur une directive européenne. Et les travailleurs des plateformes, au départ, quand moi j'ai commencé à travailler sur le sujet, je n'avais pas en tête les travailleurs du clic, je n'avais pas en tête les micro-workers. On a en tête les plus visibles, hein, ceux qui étaient les seuls à circuler dans les rues partout en Europe alors qu'on était confinés pendant le Covid, les livreurs de repas à domicile, de chez Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Glovo. On a les chauffeurs VTC également. Et quand j'ai rencontré Antonio Casilli, c'est là qu'il me dit, mais tu sais, il n'y a pas que ces travailleurs-là qui sont visibles, il y en a d'autres travailleurs qui travaillent pour des plateformes, mais qui sont invisibles, justement, qu'on ne voit pas parce qu'ils sont devant leur ordinateur chez eux. Et pour autant, ces travailleurs-là, ils ont exactement les mêmes problématiques. Je pense qu'on va l'aborder donc dans le cadre de l'événement de cet après-midi, c'est-à-dire que des travailleurs, donc ils sont plusieurs à être présents là, et je les remercie, à venir du Venezuela, à venir d'Espagne, à venir d'Italie aussi, de Syrie aussi. On aura un travailleur qui interviendra depuis la Syrie en ligne aujourd'hui, qui n'a pas pu malheureusement être présent physiquement, mais qui interviendra en ligne. Et c'est la même problématique, c'est-à-dire c'est comment la technologie est utilisée comme un prétexte pour éviter à un employeur d'assumer ses obligations. Et comment, via la technologie, on prend prétexte de l'évolution technologique pour subordonner quelqu'un, subordonner un salarié, sans lui donner un travailleur, sans lui donner la contrepartie du droit de subordination, qui sont le congé payé, les droits du travail, le droit au salaire minimum, etc., etc., etc. Et cet enjeu, donc on va le voir, il concerne les travailleurs du clic, mais il y a un autre enjeu que nous allons traiter aujourd'hui, et celui-là, il est en lien donc plus globalement avec ce moment charnière dans lequel nous sommes en ce qui concerne l'intelligence artificielle. Vous savez, l'intelligence artificielle commence à être sur toutes les lèvres, ici, au Parlement européen. L'intelligence artificielle, il y a déjà des textes européens qui existent, je pense à l'IA Act, par exemple. Il y a une forte pression de la part du Parlement européen pour qu'il y ait, dans les années qui viennent, une directive sur le management algorithmique, c'est-à-dire à la façon dont l'intelligence artificielle est utilisée pour organiser le travail, pour sanctionner, contrôler, diriger les travailleurs, et comment c'est utilisé comme un moyen de subordination. Vous dire qu'on est à la croisée des chemins parce que derrière toutes ces évolutions technologiques, c'est quoi l'enjeu? C'est l'enjeu qu'on connaît depuis des siècles. C'est le rapport entre le capital et le travail. Et la question qui nous est posée avec l'IA, c'est est-ce que l'IA va encore être un moyen d'asservir plus les travailleurs, de donner plus de poids au capital, de retirer de la plus-value, pour reprendre un concept marxiste, de retirer de la plus-value aux travailleurs tout en faisant en sorte que l'employeur ait le minimum de responsabilité? Est-ce que l'IA va participer à encourager les asymétries de pouvoir entre le patron et le travailleur, à faire en sorte qu'il y ait toujours plus de pouvoir de la part du côté du patron et de moins en moins du côté du travailleur? Ou est-ce qu'au contraire, ça peut être un outil d'émancipation? Pour les travailleurs des plateformes, pour la directive travailleurs des plateformes, on a montré que c'était possible, malgré les rapports de force qui sont parfois compliqués, souvent compliqués politiquement au Parlement européen, mais que c'était possible d'avoir une régulation qui soit en faveur des travailleurs. Pour les régulations à venir sur l'intelligence artificielle, la question, elle est posée devant nous, et c'est très important que les travailleurs s'emparent du sujet, fassent irruption, et c'est pour ça que je remercie vraiment Antonio d'organiser ce genre d'événement ici au Parlement européen avec des travailleurs et d'apporter votre expertise, parce que ça va nous être utile pour la façon dont nous allons réguler. Alors, je resserre l'entonnoir pour vous dire qu'aujourd'hui, on va parler d'une des facettes de l'exploitation liée à l'intelligence artificielle dont on parle peu. C'est-à-dire que là, je vous parlais du management algorithmique, mais il y a toute une partie en amont de l'algorithme dont on parle rarement. Et c'est l'objet donc de l'étude qui a été réalisée par Antonio et Mila Gross avec les travailleurs. Et donc, c'est en amont de l'algorithme comment il y a ces petites mains, ces humains, ces travailleurs qui entraînent l'algorithme, qui classent les données, qui trient, et qu'on ne voit pas, et qui font l'intelligence artificielle, et sans qui l'intelligence artificielle ne pourrait pas fonctionner. C'est une autre facette de l'économie de l'intelligence artificielle qu'on voit très peu, qui est très peu abordée. Jamais dans les différents événements qu'il y a ici dans la bulle européenne, on aborde cette question-là. C'est pour ça que je suis vraiment très, très ravie et honorée de pouvoir organiser cet événement avec vous cet après-midi. Je ne vais pas être plus longue, donc je vais laisser la parole à Antonio et Mila, qui ont fait un gros travail de recherche pendant plusieurs mois donc avec les travailleurs, et qui vont nous permettre de mieux comprendre qui sont ces travailleurs, d'où ils viennent, en quoi consiste leur activité, et quels sont les risques, les problématiques auxquelles nous nous exposons. Merci beaucoup à vous. Je ne vais pas faire plus long. Je vous laisse la parole.
Merci. So, Thank you very much, Leila Shaibi, for this introduction. I am Antonio Casilli, and despite my name, I'm going to be speaking English. And this is the moment where we basically share with you the main results of this initiative that has been going on since April 2023. The name that we chose, a very French name, Enquête, which stands for European Data Workers Communication and Outreach Initiative. Basically, this is the moment where we explain how this initiative came about and what we did with it, and what are the results, which will be the starting point for our conversation. The main conversation will be with you, the workers and the organizers that have joined us from, well, all over the world, actually, not only Europe, but the idea, and we can switch to the next slide, is to basically provide you with some insights from these research. You will have a QR code at the end if you want to download it. I can tell you it's riveting, the reading. Anyway, next slide. The method that we use to first of all meet and involve these workers, these data workers, and I will tell you in a minute what we mean by that in our study, is basically using online questionnaires, focus groups, and interviews. Basically we did it with workers that come from 9 Western European countries, Austria, Belgium, Germany, Spain, France, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, and Portugal. And the underlying idea is we sometimes hear about the work that is necessary to train data for AI. And we assume, because of the overwhelming evidence that is out there, that the vast majority of this work is done in low or middle-income countries, in the majority world. And we will see it in a moment that this is true. But it's also true that nonetheless, this work necessary to produce data for artificial intelligence is also performed in Europe and in high-income countries. And in places like this, it takes forms, shapes, and configurations that are specific and interesting to understand what's going on with the, future of work. Next slide, please. Leila Shaibi was already highlighting the fact that this has been a long time in the making, and to be frank, let me share with you a little frustration I personally had when the AI Act was initially negotiated and then subsequently adopted earlier this year, is that never the workers that produce data for AI and that are so important for the creation of machine learning models were invited in this building. Well, I am not entirely accurate if I say this, because once they were invited, thanks to Leila Shaibi, because they were invited within the frame of another directive, which is the Directive for Platform Work, which is not the AI Act. They had a role and they were invited. We invited people coming from Kenya, from Venezuela, from Iran and Germany. But again, that was in the debate building up to another directive. The AI Act has 0 workers in it. And this is an important point to understand also the limitations that come with that specific piece of legislation. Now, let me switch to the next slide, because I wanted to, first of all, provide you the definition that I did not provide so far. What do we mean when we say data workers? And basically, we mean people who are recruited and paid, sometimes very poorly, almost always very poorly, to perform micro tasks that are necessary to train, verify, troubleshoot, and sometimes even imitate AI. These microtasks consist in, for instance, annotating images. They receive images that sometimes are simply recorded by cameras in the street, and they have to create boxes around, I don't know, vehicles or traffic signs. Or sometimes they have to do voice transcription. And also, and this is very important, in the era of ChatGPT and other generative linguistic AI, they provide translation, analysis of linguistic pieces of conversation. This is performed by two types of organizations. In many cases, they are platforms, meaning they are websites and portals and apps that are accessible to almost everybody. And in other cases, these are closed companies called BPOs, business processing outsourcing. And these are all connected to main employers who are usually the producers of AI solutions. So if you are Meta or Amazon or Microsoft or OpenAI, well, Amazon, OpenAI and Microsoft are now the same thing, you sometimes use these platforms that are specialized to recruit people who will do the work to, well, filter, annotate, enrich the data. And next slide, just to give you a glimpse of the geography of it and to understand that this is a really global phenomenon. This is a map that is based on our own research and on research of our colleagues at the Oxford Internet Institute and the ILO in Geneva. So, when I say we, it's our team, one of the teams that contributed to the Encore project called Deep Lab. We've been in several countries and interviewed thousands of people, and we can now say in 2024 that there are international global fluxes and flows of work that go to feed the AI solutions that are produced in the countries that are marked by these red circles. These countries are, as you can see, in the north, in the minority world, but they are also in some emerging countries, notably China and India. So these are the countries where AI is produced and marketed. But to produce AI, to put on the market these LLMs, for instance, or, I don't know, face recognition algorithms, you need a lot of data. Where are those data produced? Next click. The first flow actually stems from Southeast Asia and South Asia, so Philippines, Indonesia, but more importantly, India. These are places where a lot of data workers historically have been attested, and they produce data for AI solutions that are largely marketed by US-based companies. Then there is another flow that is internal to China. I won't go in detail on it. Basically, it's smaller Chinese towns called third or fourth tier towns, being towns with a lot of people but not a big, vibrant economy that produce data for AI solutions that are marketed by companies that are in big technological hub in China, like Shanghai or Shenzhen, for instance. And then there is, and this is important to some of the participants of today's workshop, the South American flow, which basically stems from countries like Argentina, like Colombia and Venezuela, and produces data for basically two directions. One of those is not very visible on this image. I apologize for it. So some of the data go to feed AI solutions produced in the US, and others go to places like Spain, because of linguistic proximity, and more concerningly, recently, to Russian platforms. This is a long story. Anyways, and then finally, there is the final global flow that originates in Africa. And it basically is divided in three subflows. The first that goes to the US. For instance, there are people in Kenya that were invited here in February 2024, people in Kenya who do content moderation for Meta, or do data annotation for OpenAI, and they are based in Nairobi, and they produce data for US companies. Then there are a lot of people that personally I have interviewed in places like Madagascar that, because of, again, linguistic proximity, produce French data for French-speaking AIs. And then there is a final subflow that originates in Africa, in places like Egypt, and goes through Israel and through the Gulf countries and reaches China. Okay, this was just to provide the general overview and to provide you with the information, and I quickly have to shift to our final results, that this is what's going on outside Europe. Now, let's see what happens in Europe. So far, next slide, please, based on our research and on the next slide seems to be, yes. We now have a clearer picture of what's going on in Europe. Basically, there is a majority of data workers who identify as men. This again is not an overwhelming majority like the one that we can observe in other countries or in other regions, but it's clearly a majority, and this has changed because over the years the trend was basically towards more women performing this type of work in Europe. Now it has changed. They are, and they continue to be young. 75% of the participants in our study are below 35. Some of them are still studying, they're still students, and they are, and talking about studying, highly educated. 67% have a bachelor's degree or more. We systematically encounter people who have a master's degree, some that also have a PhD diploma, that do this kind of job because they have no access to the formal market. And this is an important point that we have to stress. There is a link between this type of labor and underemployment and unemployment. And this is even more clear if we look at the places where we find a higher density of data workers in Europe. Countries like Spain, Portugal, and Italy, knowing what we know about the difficulties to access the formal market, the formal labor market in countries like this explains why we observe a higher presence of data workers. But there is an exception, and we will see in a minute why. It's Germany. Germany is a place where we do meet a lot of data workers, and if you go to the next slide, you will have a hint of why. So okay, don't be too hypnotized by this big will. I will tell you in a minute what is it about. Basically, the reason why in countries like France and Germany we still encounter a lot of data workers is because many of these are migrants that move to Europe and go on working exactly in the same sector, sometimes performing the same type of data work on the same platforms or for the same BPOs than when they were in their country of origin. So we have actually 1/5 of the people that we have interviewed that are migrants. Again, it doesn't seem like a big share, but it is if you look at the countries where this happens. And you will soon recognize that, for instance, the majority of people that come from Asia tend to go to countries like Germany to perform this work. This is basically Turkey. And for instance, people from Africa and French-speaking African countries tend to go to places like France to perform this same type of labor. And of course, a lot to be said about countries, people coming from South America that move from Brazil or Venezuela to Portugal and Spain to perform this same type of work. They experience for this migrant population the strongest mismatch between their high level of education and poor job conditions and prospects. This is a very important point. If you are interested in human capital, this is probably one of the biggest waste of human capital in human history. We are sacrificing an entire generation of highly educated women and men that would be ready for incredibly satisfying and profitable jobs, but they cannot access to them, and they have to work on this sector. Sorry, I was a little long, but Mila, the floor is yours.
No problem. Hello, everyone. Also from me, thank you so much, Leila, for having us and for inviting us. And also thanks everyone for being here, listening to what we and also the workers in a minute have to say. I want to join Antonio in highlighting the importance of this finding of really, we didn't sample specifically for migrants, but we just encountered them. And just to give you an idea of what these numbers mean, when we did the qualitative part of this study, the focus groups, the interviews, we encountered, again, we didn't sample and we didn't look specifically for migrants, but of the 18 workers who participated in the focus groups, 15 were data workers. 15 were migrants in the first generation, and the others, all of the others were sons and daughters of migrants to European countries. And this is important because migration and the specific situations of these workers creates a type of dependency that makes them subject to horrible labor conditions and to specifically low wages and wage theft, as I will explain in a minute. Many of them depend on this job to keep a visa. Many of them depend on this job to stay in the country to which they are migrants. So they are not prone to, they cannot complain, and they don't have a lot of options in terms of, well, if you don't like it, just leave, but then leave where, and what happens with my migration status. When we talk about wages, so it's important to differentiate here the question of what is piecemeal work that is mostly pervasive in platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk and others that are very similar to those. In those platforms, as the workers will explain in a minute, they just get the tasks that they get and they work on those tasks and they get paid per task, per click, per picture that they label, per text that they upload, per text that they translate. In the BPOs, in these companies that are specialized in this type of data services and also content moderation for social media, the workers have part-time or full-time positions with a salary, with a fixed salary. In both situations, there is wage theft happening. In the platforms, the wage theft is in form of mass rejections, meaning the requesters, the client, they can request work. Then that work goes through a quality evaluation, and if the result of that quality evaluation is, oh, we don't like the way this work has been performed, then they can reject that batch of work. They get to keep the data, but they don't pay the workers. That's wage theft right there. There is a lot of time that goes unpaid, the times that it takes for the workers to find a suitable task, a task that they can do, the time that takes the workers to actually read the instructions, understand the instructions. All that is unpaid time. So they literally only get paid for the clicks or for the pictures or for the data that they produce and deliver, only in the cases in which that's accepted. In the BPOs, wage theft look a little bit different. There are many cases, as the German or the workers in Germany who participated in the study reported, in which they are paid for theoretically a week of 40 hours, but then, 32 hours, and then they have to work the 40 hours a week. And then in terms of wages, just to give you an idea of what type of prices we are talking about, in the platforms, workers get more or less 7 to 9 euros an hour. That's what they make, considering whether they get to task and so on. So that's not a steady income. It's more or less what in average a worker can make at the platform. And at the BPO, for example, in Germany, they make a little bit more than basic wage, so that is €14.40 an hour. Next slide, please. So let's remember, as Antonio already mentioned, that these workers, so these BPOs and platforms are just shells for big tech companies. So the work comes from big tech companies. It's just that They are not calling these workers their employees. They don't offer any type of protection. But the labor and the capital these workers produce is to make, in many cases, big tech companies richer. That's basically what that is. But the workers have no protection and no connection to these big tech companies. What the companies do is, in many cases, silence these workers, and they do that through NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. And that's a weapon, that's a tool that these companies use to produce a lot of uncertainty in the workers, but also a lot of harm, cause a lot of harm in the workers. The workers don't feel, in many cases, they are not allowed to talk about the nature of their work in cases in which the workers deal with disturbing material, like, for example, content moderators. They cannot go to their friends and say, oh, you know what I just saw, or, you know, I'm feeling very bad because of the type of content I've been working with. They cannot even say, I am doing this for Meta, or I'm doing this for Facebook. They cannot say that. We have had workers telling us that they don't even feel they can safely go and talk to a therapist, even though they are going through many mental health conditions, because they are afraid of breaking the NDA, or they have been told, if you did that, if you go to a therapist and you tell them what's going on, you will be breaking the NDA. And also that leads to the workers, in many cases, not even knowing what is going to be built on the data that they work on. So that can be anything from an entertainment app to a weapon that is literally going to kill thousands of people, like it's happening right now. So that's something that is very, very present in the workers. Like, it is not like they don't care or they don't, you know, have that type of thought. It's just that nobody is informing them, and in the situations in which they are, they just don't feel that they can be asking these type of questions. And if they ask those type of questions, they are literally just banned from the job, or they are banned from the platform, or they are subject to retaliation in the companies. Just one last thought on this. This type of, you know, keeping workers in the dark contrasts very much with the hyper-surveillance that is at the same time present in this type of work. So the workers are hyper-surveilled. Their every move, there is, algorithmic management going on, that their performance is surveilled in many cases, or in most cases, their wages are dependent on their performance. But, and the companies and the platforms get to know everything about the workers. The workers just don't get to know anything about the requesters and about the platforms in itself. So next and last slide, please. And all this, as I was saying, causes a really high mental health toll on the workers. And this is the main work hazard. This is different from other platform workers like delivery drivers who have other types of health hazards in their work. This is, in the case of data workers, is mainly about mental health. The mental health issues come from the uncertainty of not knowing whether they will make enough to pay rent or to make a living out of that, from the mass of arbitrary rejections that they suffer in many cases. They are managed basically by algorithms in many cases. So who are you going to go and appeal the decision of banning you from the platform? You cannot have a conversation with an algorithm, and that's very, very frustrating. As I was saying before, the fear of not only losing your livelihood and you know, your income, but also literally losing the right to stay in the place that you have migrated to. So losing your visa, losing the right to stay in a country. Of course, in cases when the workers are working with disturbing content, like content moderation specifically, but also many data labelers labeling content that is very, very disturbing. In those cases, of course, the mental health toll of this type of work is higher. We have had many workers telling us that they suffer from PTSD, from panic attacks, and many other depression. That this is very pervasive among data workers. And then all this is parallel to the fact that, these workers are immersed in a form of precarity that specifically affects women data workers and also migrant data workers, and that in which in many cases they are excluded from public services, in which they are excluded from getting help for legal help, mental health help, or any other type of help. Also, they are very much isolated because in many cases they work online from home. So and it's not like they can talk to colleagues, organize, and that also hinders organizing efforts. We will discuss that in our second panel today. And then the fact of knowing that if you get sick, mental health or otherwise, you don't have any type of protection. Like workers working at the platforms, like any other platform workers, they don't have, like a health insurance, or they don't have, the protection, and they also don't earn a lot of money that they could afford, getting sick. So I think that's it for me. If you go to the next slide, there's a QR code, so we invite you to read the report and reach out if you have comments. We are very excited about your questions. Thank you.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Mila, and thank you, Leila Shaibi. This was just an introduction. We want to quickly leave the floor to the workers that you are here to listen. And if you have questions, we invite you to a little patience. We will ask questions at the end of the next session that will be chaired by Milagros. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite Oscarina, Nacho, Donatella to join me here. And we also have Yasser online, I think, on Zoom, hopefully. Oscarina, por favor, si puedes venir. Cuando querés hablar, apretas el botón rojo, ¿sí?
Del lado izquierdo.
Sí. Y esto te pones para poder entender lo que va pasando así.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, once more, thank you everyone for being here. This is really, I think, the most important part of this, the part in which we get to meet the data workers, we get to hear from their first-hand experiences. We have a very stellar panel here. These are data workers that have been collaborating with us for a while now in different capacities. So yeah, and they have very important points to make. So the way this is going to go is they will introduce themselves. Each one of them is going to start with a very short statement for 5 to 3 minutes each about a specific dimension of data work that is important to them. And then I think I will have probably questions. Otherwise, we can open the floor for your questions. So sitting here next to me, to my left, is Oscarina Fuentes from Venezuela, now living in Colombia. To my right is Donatella Del Piano from Italy, Nacho Barros from Spain, and online on Zoom is Yasser Al-Rayes from Syria. Yasser, I just want to briefly acknowledge this. Yasser was supposed to be here, but given the situation in the Middle East, there is no parliament for Belgium and Syria. There is no parliament for Belgium anymore. In Syria, the next one was in Lebanon, and given the situation and the attack of Israel on Lebanon, Yasser we couldn't send him to go get a visa or try to get a visa, that's also the question, to a place that is currently being bombed. So this is why we decided that he will participate via Zoom. Okay, then I will just pass it on first to Oscarina. Oscarina, por favor, si querés leer tu...
Okay. Bueno, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Oscarina Fuentes, soy trabajadora de datos desde hace más de 10 años. Soy migrante venezolana, estoy viviendo actualmente en Colombia. Y bueno, la verdad que nunca imaginé que otras personas se interesarían y hasta se preocupan por nosotros, que a pesar de que trabajamos para estas grandes empresas, somos la mano de obra barata y descartables para ellos. Por eso vuelvo a darles las gracias por la invitación. Y bueno, no solo les hablaré por mí, sino también por los cientos de data workers latinoamericanos que conozco, los cuales trabajan en las mismas plataformas que yo. En mi caso, yo trabajo desde mi habitación, con un computador que compré con mi dinero. También pago mi internet, mi teléfono y la electricidad. No es como las personas piensan, que uno al trabajar para esta plataforma, para estas grandes empresas, creen que ellos suministran todo. Y que uno lo hace desde una oficina hasta se imagina alguna supercomputadora, y no es así. Hay ventajas y desventajas de trabajar para este tipo de plataformas, donde los únicos contratos que se firman son los de confidencialidad, quedando nosotros los trabajadores en total vulnerabilidad a que simplemente un día ellos desaparezcan y ya no exista más trabajo. Y bueno, esta es la gran preocupación de mis colegas y la mía. Los trabajos que se realizan tienen de todo un poco, es muy variado la verdad. Abarca información de ingeniería, medicina, matemáticas, películas, empresas, fotografías, animales, naturaleza, de todo un poco. Antes de cada tarea, ellos nos hacen evaluaciones para ver si eres elegible o no para continuar. Toca estar siempre muy concentrados, enfocados, eligiendo siempre las mejores respuestas. Yo antes trabajaba con la plataforma de Appen, pero debido a una disminución de trabajo, ahora trabajo en 5 plataformas más a la vez. No existen horarios, por lo que siempre existe una incertidumbre sobre cuándo saldrá un trabajo. Estoy consciente que lo que hacemos para estas empresas debería ser mejor pagado, con mejores condiciones, tener alguna garantía de seguridad como empleados, sobre todo tomando en cuenta por los años trabajados. Sería excelente trabajar con la tranquilidad de que estamos protegidos. Esto generaría progreso y bienestar. Por ejemplo, ya para terminar, les menciono algo que me ocurrió el mes pasado, y es que de las 5 plataformas a las que trabajo, 3 de ellas hicieron actualizaciones en sus sistemas, lo que ocasionó que nos retuvieran los pagos. Con el único que tengo seguridad que pagará será con la plataforma de Appen, porque con ellos ya ha pasado con sus actualizaciones y a pesar de que se han tardado, igual terminan liberando el pago. Pero con las otras 2 no estoy segura y son pagos de todo un mes trabajado. Y otro problema que tengo con otra plataforma de esas en las que también trabajo, por actualizaciones que ellos hicieron con su sistema de pago, no me han liberado lo que he hecho en 3 meses. Al inicio del problema les había escrito por medio de un ticket, el cual es el único medio de comunicación que se tiene con ellos, y me habían respondido solicitando algunas pruebas de que podía recibir el dinero a través de PayPal. Incluso me pidieron una carta de PayPal donde mencionara que sí, que mi cuenta estaba sin restricciones y sin límites, y podía recibir el dinero sin problemas. Y todo eso lo hice. Y lo último que me dijeron es que tuviese paciencia, que ellos resolverían eso. Y bueno, ya han pasado más de 3 meses y no me han resuelto. Les he vuelto a escribir y mis tickets nuevos se eliminan de inmediato. Solo quedó ese como activo y que procesando. La verdad, no sé si perdí mi dinero de 3 meses y mi tiempo. Puede que me lo liberen algún día, sí, pero puede que no. ¿Quién me da garantías a mí de eso? ¿Quién los obliga a ellos a cumplir con esos pagos? Les he expresado por medio del ticket que quedó abierto que por favor me los liberen, ya que necesito el dinero para poder pagar mi arriendo, los servicios, comprar medicamentos, imagínense, buscando la manera de hacer sentir empáticos a alguien que ni siquiera sé si me estará leyendo, hasta incluso no sé si será un bot. Y bueno, todas estas semanas han sido terribles para mí. Mis niveles de cortisol seguro se elevaron porque me ha dado hasta insomnio, pensando cómo cumplir con mis responsabilidades económicas. ¿Qué podemos hacer para solventar esto? ¿Cómo puedo resolver mis problemas económicos con esta situación? Porque ellos se pueden liberar y decir que sus plataformas son solo para generar ingresos extra. Y supongo que la gente se preguntará, ¿por qué no trabajo en otra cosa, un trabajo más estable? Y sí, podría ser. El problema es que esos trabajos estables en Latinoamérica tampoco son bien pagados. Obviamente, me encantaría conseguir un mejor trabajo, algo donde sí me alcance el dinero para invertir en un negocio, comprar una casa, ayudar a mi familia. Ese es mi sueño, así que es frustrante no lograr conseguirlo. Pero ¿a quién le importa? ¿Quién está interesado en ayudarnos a nosotros los data workers fantasmas, a los que casi nadie conoce ni sabe que existimos? Y bueno, eso me lo preguntaba siempre. Y en el transcurso de estos años he conocido personas que les interesan estos temas, incluyéndolas a ustedes. La verdad, nunca pensé que tendría la oportunidad de expresarme de esta manera para el público, que a alguien le importáramos como personas y que de alguna manera querrán hasta ayudarnos. Solo con sentir esa empatía a través de ustedes que están aquí dando su valioso tiempo para escucharnos, solo con eso me reconforta y me llena de fe. Y bueno, muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Oscarina. Donatella.
Sì? Ok, perfetto. Io mi chiamo Donatella, vengo dall'Italia, sono una linguista e ho studiato scienze linguistiche, ecco, da un punto di vista generale, teorico, eccetera. Sono molto affascinata da tutto ciò che concerne il linguaggio, lo studio dei segni, della semiotica, eccetera. Per questo sono una, insomma, entusiasta delle intelligenze artificiali della prima ora. Dopo la laurea magistrale mi sono trovata però abbastanza in un buco nero, perché essendo linguistica una carriera non professionalizzante, è molto difficile che tu trovi un impiego vero senza pagare un master, senza fare esperienze all'estero e altre cose che insomma sono caratterizzate da una bella dose di privilegio di classe. Ho iniziato già con le traduzioni da molti anni, sempre su sistemi di questo tipo per task e microtask, ma il lavoro più importante l'ho trovato tramite LinkedIn. Sono finita a lavorare per una piattaforma intermediaria che vende dati testuali strutturati a Big Tech e praticamente faccio un lavoro di annotazione di dati di due tipi, un lavoro estrattivo basato principalmente sulla correzione di testi da un punto di vista di fattualità, di logica, e un lavoro più creativo di imitazione di bot, per cui scrivo prompt e risposte per large language models come ChatGPT, eccetera, come se un umano rispondesse al posto del bot, di modo che i bot possano imparare. Questo tipo di apprendimento nel machine learning si chiama reinforcement learning from human feedback e serve appunto a dare un feedback positivo, come se dietro queste macchine ci fosse un essere umano. Spiegato in breve dal punto di vista tecnico, quello di cui mi occupo, andiamo nella parte più politica e sociale di questo tipo di lavoro e insomma per capire che tipo di categoria di lavoratori crea. Il problema politico principale secondo me è che questo tipo di lavoro non crea una categoria, è un lavoro atomizzante che rende gli individui soli, che non riescono a interagire con i colleghi al di fuori di piattaforme non controllate direttamente dalle compagnie o dai quality managers. Addirittura ci sono i canali Reddit dove si mettono i quality managers a leggere, viene consigliato di utilizzare delle mail alternative, c'è un canale che assomiglia a Discord in cui di nuovo è praticamente impossibile contattare altre persone in privato, non si vedono mai in faccia gli operatori, per quanto io possa essere una persona molto avvantaggiata al lavoro da remoto, considerata la paga e le condizioni di profondissima instabilità che offre, è un gioco che non vale la candela, ecco. Questa alienazione è foraggiata da pressioni per fare un certo numero di KPI che altrimenti farebbero escludere dai progetti, questo ricade anche nel discorso del wage theft, per cui molto lavoro non viene effettivamente pagato, non viene conteggiato, quello che si spende a leggere manuali, a fare riunioni, a qualsiasi ora del giorno e della notte, perché i quality managers vivono negli Stati Uniti. E qua andiamo a un altro problema grosso. In Italia, come anche in tutta l'Unione Europea, questa compagnia paga in dollari su PayPal. PayPal ha un cambio, un tasso di cambio dal dollaro all'euro che è completamente sproporzionato rispetto al mercato, per cui tutte le settimane, che siamo pagate a settimana, che arriva lo stipendio, ci mangiamo tutto con le transazioni. Sì, insomma, secondo me è un peccato che una grossa fetta di forza lavoro altamente specializzata si ritrovi a fare dei lavori di questo tipo. Questo credo che dipenda dalle condizioni di lavoro scarse di alcuni stati, l'Italia è una di queste, dal fatto che non esista un salario minimo e che la compagnia per cui lavoro si basi sul salario minimo degli Stati Uniti, che per un italiano sembra alto, per loro è appena sopra il minimum wage. Per cui un italiano, con la scarsità di progetti che ci sono, che loro sono anche molto bravi a creare scarsità sul lavoro, a creare competizione per i task che appaiono nella home, per le cose insomma, per cui bisogna contattare per avere lavoro, eccetera. Un italiano, un'italiana non riesce a viverci, nonostante ci possa lavorare anche per 5-6 ore al giorno. È una formula così. Poi favoreggia moltissimo il lavoro nero, perché insomma, sapendo che collegando PayPal puoi ricevere soldi così, penso che nessuna persona italiana sana di mente si aprirebbe una partita IVA apposta per pagare le tasse verso un'azienda che non gli dà alcuna tutela fiscale. Insomma, mi sento come se lavorassi per una black box, di cui non so insomma che fine fanno i dati strutturati che ricavano, come a loro volta li strutturano, quali sono le richieste del cliente finale, ma non so nemmeno come sia organizzata la loro gerarchia interna, cioè chi sia assunto, chi sia freelancer. Insomma, è un lavoro che secondo me è adatto a persone che lo tengono come beer money, non come lavoro per cui viverci, almeno. Tutto qui.
Tante grazie. Nacho.
Hello, my name is Nacho. I'm from Spain. First of all, I wanted to thank Leila, Antonio, and Mila for this opportunity and for the interest and the research, each one in their way, politically and socially. And first, I wanted to say that I started doing platform work during the pandemic. I was really looking for a plan B because the future in the work was very uncertain, and I was looking for a plan B in case I don't go back to work, or if I want to find a new job or something. And for me, it was quite fascinating, this world. At the beginning, I found it quite fascinating because you can do plenty of different tasks, and you can choose all the tasks you want to make. Some tasks you are not good, other tasks you are good. And for me, it was very, I could do at home, yeah? And after a while, I want to say that now I'm not doing it, yeah? I do occasionally tasks from time to time, yeah? But because now I'm working full time again, but the problem with this world is that we don't take into account all the time we spend looking for jobs in the platforms, because people who do these jobs, they do it in different platforms. You have to go platform by platform to find the jobs. And at the same time, you are competing with other people. And and these people is one example, as it was mentioned before, is the Uber, Uber riders. Uber riders, they are managed by an algorithm. They are not managed by a person or somebody in charge. They are managed by an algorithm, and there is a competition. And the ones that get the job first, they have to be available all the time. That reminds me something that I didn't mention, that it was before I started getting in platform work. Before the pandemic, I already knew 2 or 3 platforms, because I did translation jobs for 2 platforms, which was okay, translation work. One of them, it was called Gengo, and it was a fair platform. It didn't pay too much, but I could do some extra. But the other one, it was called Tomedes, that now it doesn't exist, changed the name. And I remember that Tomedes, it was a platform where when there was a job to translate from English to Spanish, you had to bid for the job. So they say the one who bid the lowest fare for the job, it was the one who get the job. So it's amazing, and that's not regulated in any sense. And that's a good example of what is happening now, And me, I started doing this because of translation works, because I like languages and these kind of things, And after, during the pandemic and after the pandemic, when I was doing this job, was when I met Antonio and Mila, because I had an interview with them via Zoom, and I realized all the work they are doing, and how precarious is getting this. Because at the beginning, it must be because now I'm not into it so much, but I know it very well because I know many platforms. At the time, I was registered in 10 platforms, but I didn't work in each one, but I have a look at every platform from now and then. And it was like, when you had a technical problem, you had to contact them. But you are contacting somebody who you don't, you have to wait for the answer to you because you were doing the job and half the job, you had the problem. Then you cannot finish the job. Then you have the uncertainty that they're going to accept it or no, because that's another thing. If some client asks for a job and the job is not what they expected, they can reject it. It was not my case. In many cases, I was rejected a couple of times. And basically, that's why I stopped. But I'm very interested still in jobs like translation and things like audio, judging audios, and judging apps as well. I like, is something that I like, and I can do it in French, in Spanish, but most of the jobs are in Spanish and English. And if I'm always having a look at it in case, well, I want to finish. I just want to say that the problem is not that the AI is going to take our jobs. The problem is that we are going to work like slaves for AI. That's the dangerous, unless there is a regulation. That's all from me. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Nacho. And now, last but not least, is Yasser, hopefully online. Do we have Yasser? Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Yasser. Nice
Hi.
to see you. I'm very glad. It's a pity you cannot be here, but it's great that you were still able to join us somehow. I believe you have a very, very important perspective to share with all of us. So the floor is yours, Yasser. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mila. Hello, everyone. My name is Yasser Reyes. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your invitation to speak before you today. I am from Syria and currently live in Damascus. I'm a computer engineering graduate from University of Damascus. Over the past 3 years, I have worked as a data annotator. In this role, I have contributed to many projects focusing on labeling and annotating data for various machine learning and AI applications. My responsibilities include ensuring data quality, created detailed annotations, and collaborating with project teams to meet specific requirements. As a data worker, I always advocate for the well-being, good working environments, and better living conditions for the data workers like us, who play a crucial role in powering AI application and our digital economy. And in Syria, data workers face many hardships due to the ongoing conflict and unstable economy. We often have no electricity and an unstable internet connection, making it challenging to continue our work. We have some time to search for places to work and pay for high expenses for electricity and internet, which is unfair to our earning. All these shortcomings come with strict deadlines and high accuracy requirements, which often lead to our work being rejected and sometimes to us being fired from our jobs. As I showed in my documentary in the Data Workers Inquiry project led by Dr. Mila, that documentary aims to shed light on these issues, the daily struggles of the data workers, and explores the dual life we lead, balancing our work with our studies and personal lives, given that most of the data workers in Syria here are university students. I would also like to speak for my colleague data workers in Lebanon who are having a hard time now because of the ongoing war after Israel's recent attacks, which have bombed many cities, killed thousands of civilians, and forced others to flee their homes in search of safety. The Syrian refugee data workers in Lebanon, they have already fled the war in Syria and living as refugees in Lebanon, and now they face a new dangerous and uncertainties. Many are struggling to find safe places without limited resources and support, which makes it extremely hard for them to find safe environments to live and to work in. Finally, as a data worker and as a part of the AI community, I adhere to the ethics of AI and reject any misuse of it, as we witness in our countries, whether Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. AI systems are being used to harm our people, like for example, Where's Daddy and Lavender, these AI systems developed by Israel, which analyze the movement of people and their locations, using communication pattern to create kill list of individuals. The individual identified by these systems are then bombed while they are at home with their families, with the AI decisions being treated as if they were made by humans. I think it's very sad that we are living in a time when AI machines are being given the responsibility to make life and death decisions and weaponizing technologies that are meant to facilitate people's life. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yasser, for that testimony. And I want to take this brief opportunity to thank everyone, actually, for being here. I want to highlight again that these workers, they risk a lot by speaking up. NDAs are in place. People are living in places that are literally being attacked right now under repressive regimes in other cases. So everyone who is here is in a way running a lot of risks. So I would like to acknowledge that. And speaking of that, finally, last testimony that we have today before we go into the questions. So there was a group that we invited, that those are the content moderators in Germany to join us. They participated in this study. And we would have liked to have their testimony, but unfortunately they suffer. Probably it is not by chance that in Germany right now they are suffering of really strong retaliation at their workplace. They risk a lot, not just being fired, but also being prosecuted if they speak up, if they show their faces, if their anonymity is broken. So what they did, still they wanted to bring up a couple of issues. They gave us a letter that we are going to give to Leila later on. I would like to read right now, or they asked me to read right now. I'm not going to read the full letter because it's very extensive, but we produced a summary that I would like to read now. Heads up for the interpretation workers, I'm going to read in Germany, so just there will be a switch. Okay, so the letter, das ist ein Brief von Content-ModeratorInnen von Meta bei TELUS Digital in Deutschland. Und sehr geehrte Mitglieder des Europäischen Parlaments, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, wir wenden uns mit diesem Schreiben an Sie, um auf ein dringendes Thema aufmerksam zu machen: die Arbeitsbedingungen von Content-ModeratorInnen die von Outsourcing-Unternehmen, die für große Tech-Plattformen beschäftigt werden. Wir spielen eine entscheidende Rolle bei der Gestaltung von Online-Communities und der Gewährleistung der Sicherheit digitaler Räume. Doch die Arbeitsbedingungen, unter denen wir täglich arbeiten, belasten nicht nur unser Wohlbefinden, sondern beeinträchtigen auch die Qualität der Content-Moderation, auf die die NutzerInnen angewiesen sind. Wir als Content-ModeratorInnen arbeiten 40 Stunden und mehr in hochstressigen Umfeldern und sind dabei verstörenden und traumatisierenden Inhalten ausgesetzt, ohne ausreichende Pausen oder Ressourcen. Die Natur unserer Arbeit führt bei vielen von uns zu schweren psychischen Problemen, darunter Angstzustände, Depressionen und posttraumatische Belastungsstörungen. Wir erhalten lediglich 20% über dem deutschen Mindestlohn, was 14,98 € pro Stunde entspricht, ein Betrag, der von Facebook als hochqualifiziert und ausreichend erachtet wird. Die Tatsache, dass wir für diese schwere und oft traumatische Arbeit nur geringfügig mehr als den Mindestlohn bekommen, ist eine klare Form der Ausbeutung. Während große Tech-Unternehmen wie Meta von unserer Arbeit profitieren, distanzieren sie sich konsequent von den katastrophalen Arbeitsbedingungen, unter denen wir täglich arbeiten. Wir sind die unsichtbaren ArbeiterInnen, die dafür sorgen, dass die Plattformen sicher und sauber bleiben. Und dennoch erhalten wir weder die nötige Anerkennung noch die Unterstützung, die wir benötigen. Meta und anderen Tech-Giganten überlassen diese kritische Aufgabe Outsourcing-Unternehmen, um sich ihrer Verantwortung zu entziehen und die damit verbundenen Kosten und Verpflichtungen auf Dritte abzuwälzen. Dies zeigt, dass Meta eher an Profitmaximierung interessiert ist, als an der tatsächlichen Verbesserung unserer Arbeitsumstände. Die psychische Unterstützung für Content-ModeratorInnen ist erschreckend unzureichend und praktisch nicht zugänglich. Unternehmen wie Meta behaupten zwar, psychologische Ressourcen und Beratungsdienste bereitzustellen, aber die Realität sieht anders aus. In der Praxis haben wir kaum die Möglichkeit, diese Unterstützung in Anspruch zu nehmen. Der Grund liegt an den extremen hohen Produktionsanforderungen, die uns aufgezwungen werden. In einer typischen 8-stündigen Schicht müssen wir nahezu 7 Stunden am Arbeitsplatz bleiben und kontinuierlich Content moderieren. Während dieser Zeit dürfen wir unseren Arbeitsplatz nicht verlassen und müssen uns ohne Unterbrechung mit belastenden und oft traumatisierendem Material auseinandersetzen. Es ist längst überfällig, dass die EU nicht nur die Notwendigkeit einer umfassenden psychischen Gesundheitsversorgung für alle Content-ModeratorInnen anerkennt, sondern auch sicherstellt, dass diese Unterstützung tatsächlich zugänglich und nutzbar ist. Wir benötigen eine angemessene Anzahl von Urlaubstagen, da das gesetzliche Mindestmaß von 20 Tagen in Deutschland nicht ausreicht, um uns von den hohen mentalen Belastungen zu erholen. Unser Betrieb arbeitet rund um die Uhr und wir tragen somit eines der höchsten Arbeitspensen in Deutschland. Sehr viele von uns sind Migranten in der ersten Generation und stehen vor der Herausforderung, uns in einem Arbeitsumfeld zurechtzufinden, das stark von der deutschen Sprache und Bürokratie geprägt ist. Wir hätten uns von der Gewerkschaft Verdi Unterstützung und Verständnis erwartet, doch leider wurden wir enttäuscht, nachdem wir Verdi durch unsere Zusammenarbeit einen bedeutenden Schub in ihrer öffentlichen Wahrnehmung verschafft haben, wurden wir schlicht und ergreifend im Stich gelassen. Ohne englischsprachige Ansprechpartner, ohne Unterstützung, ohne die Fürsorge, die wir so dringend gebraucht hätten. Statt Solidarität haben wir ein kaltes kapitalistisches Kalkül erfahren. Wir appellieren an das Europäische Parlament, Gesetze zu erlassen, die die Rechte und Arbeitsbedingungen von Content-ModeratorInnen adressieren. Dazu gehört die Durchsetzung fairer Löhne, der Zugang zu psychischen Gesundheitsressourcen sowie die Einführung von Transparenzanforderungen für Tech-Unternehmen bezüglich ihrer Praktiken in der Content-Moderation. Wir benötigen Ihre Hilfe, damit Social Media ein friedlicher Ort, an dem sich die über 5 Milliarden NutzerInnen sicher und respektiert fühlen können. Es ist an der Zeit, dass die Arbeit der Content-ModeratorInnen die Anerkennung und Unterstützung erhält, die sie verdient. Ohne eine fundierte Gesetzgebung werden wir nicht in der Lage sein, die psychischen Belastungen zu überstehen und gleichzeitig eine angemessene Arbeit zu leisten. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit und Unterstützung in dieser wichtigen Angelegenheit. Dankeschön. Okay, I think we would like to, I would like to open the floor for questions. First, your questions. I have a couple of questions, but I think it is important because we have limited time. We have around 20 minutes for questions, or 25. So yeah, I think it would be better to start with your questions, and then if there's time, I will have some of mine. You can address your questions to whomever you feel.
Is this working? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for all the insights. Question to the workers from outside of the EU. Do you think that if the EU passed any legislation on this topic, that it would improve your work? How would it improve your work? How would it help you, basically? Thank you.
Oscarina primero, después afterwards Yasser.
Bueno, si se llega a aprobar eso acá en la Unión Europea, sería un primer gran paso para poder avanzar y que pueda llegar a Latinoamérica. Pero primero se tiene que dar el paso, y este sería uno bueno. Entonces, eso es lo que pienso.
Yasser?
Yes, I think if the legislation passed the EU, it's going to be help a lot data workers in Lebanon, for example. But I don't know if, in our case, the data workers in Syria, because due to the sanction, the American sanction in Syria, we kind of, I believe, isolated from the world. So I don't know if it's going to help us here in Syria.
Antonio?
is actually not a question, but I would like to develop on that just very quickly. There is something that the existence of a dedicated European directive would do. And this is, first of all, first and foremost, in terms of creating a virtuous circle in terms of emulation from other countries. This is something that we observed back in the day with the GDPR, and then the fact that all over the world, a lot of companies and countries that want to do business with Europe now have to comply with this law. So, and then the second thing is that by its nature, this data work is a global phenomenon. We are now lucky to have with us here today people that come from specific places, live in specific places, but their work is international in nature. And there is another important point, another important piece of legislation that was adopted by the European Union this year, and it's actually the directive on corporate responsibility and due diligence. It seems removed from what we do here, what we discuss here, but it has to do with companies having to ensure that all along their supply chain, human rights and worker rights and environmental rights are respected. If we focus specifically on workers' rights, this means that we already have some pieces of legislation that, as of today, might improve the working conditions of data workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, for adding that. I think that's a very important point, and it reminds me, Oscarina, you actually, before this, we did interviews, and I was translating for Oscarina, and you said something very similar about the hope of, you know, this being emulated by other regions and nations, including Latin America. So that's, for many, the hope. Okay, any other questions? Yes, please.
Hello. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. I was wondering, especially for those of you who have been providing your services for one similar platform provider, or even those who provide it very seldom, what is the role of unions and collective bargaining in this relationship? Do you feel like unions are somehow there to also help you in pushing for these changes in-house and also as a general societal issue? Or what is your approach on unions and collective push for your rights? Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think before we direct these questions to specific workers, I think I want to say something also from the perspectives, from the perspective of the German or the workers in Germany that wrote that letter. As the letter says, but again, there is a more extensive version of that letter in which they explain their relationship to Verdi, which is one of the biggest unions in Germany. And that relationship is one of disappointment. That's the issue there. And there are many ways of explaining this. One of them could be the inability of unions, of traditional trade unions, to adapt to new times, the inability of those unions, or probably unwillingness to adapt to new work settings and new ways of connecting and communicating new needs. The fact that these workers are mostly migrants, that many of them don't speak German, and not even, being able to call your union for help and having someone understand you, having someone who speaks at least English. I'm not saying your first language, at least English. It's ridiculous, and it is very, very disappointing for many workers. There are developments that indicate that workers then tend to look for other forms of organizing, like, for example, the Content Moderators Union in Kenya that has expanded now to other African countries. We will have in a minute a panel about organizing, and we will get to know more about Tercopticon, another worker-led organization of this kind. I think, I don't know, maybe Donatella or Nacho are connected to unions and they want to add something, but I think there other forms of organizing are more typical in this space. Maybe Oscarina also in a minute wants to say something about workers organizing over Facebook, over, WhatsApp groups. But first, maybe Donatella, you want to say something.
Okay, so in Italy, unions are like a very institutional organization that does not contact the big pool of workers that usually don't receive validation from the masses. So data work wasn't received by unions in Italy. But there are some independent groups. For example, I know some people from Tech Workers Coalition, which is a small circle, which a good friend of mine has founded. And there are some people that are already active in political communities that study this work or are involved in it, and then they get to analyze and see the social structure that lies underneath it. But aside from that, it's all spontaneous groups in the smallest communities that can be formed on Reddit without the quality managers seen. So, oh, sorry for English. I don't know why.
Probably because I asked you in English. Nacho, ¿quieres agregar algo? ¿No?
Not too much. As far as I know, I just know the traditional unions in Spain, and they are not connected at all with micro work or platform work. If somebody knows any union, let me know, because I'm interested, just in case. Thank you.
Gracias, Nacho. Oscarina, esa iba a ser mi pregunta de cualquier manera. Mi pregunta iba a ser sobre si nos podías contar un poco sobre los grupos de WhatsApp y los grupos de Facebook y qué significado tienen y qué significancia tienen para ustedes.
Bueno, eso quería mencionar. Yo estoy en varios grupos de Telegram, WhatsApp, donde hablo con cientos de latinoamericanos que trabajamos las mismas plataformas, como había mencionado anteriormente. Y como también había mencionado, la verdad que no existe ningún sindicato por ahora de aquel lado. Como había mencionado, en realidad nunca pensé que esto se podría llegar a dar. Es más, ni siquiera lo había ni imaginado, de que en algún momento se pudiera hasta plantear que aprobaran alguna ley para nosotros. La verdad que prácticamente como todos nosotros en realidad pensamos que somos como descartables, sin significado, sin importancia para ellos. Y tampoco pensábamos que a otras personas les interesaría conocernos y hasta incluso quisieran ayudarnos. Pero sindicatos como tal, no. En los grupos de apoyo, bueno, los grupos son muy importantes porque estas plataformas requieren, como les había también mencionado, ellos realizan unas evaluaciones para antes de empezar a realizar los trabajos. Estas evaluaciones se tienen que tener por encima del 80% de respuestas correctas a la hora de uno poder empezar a realizar los trabajos. En ocasiones hay clientes que son muy exigentes y requieren una aprobación al 100%. ¿Qué pasa? Que con los grupos de trabajo nosotros nos apoyamos de manera tal de que si alguien entiende, porque a veces envían instrucciones, pero hay otras veces que no, y hay que adivinar qué es lo que quiere el cliente. Entonces, entre nosotros mismos vamos analizando las preguntas y tratamos de elegir siempre las mejores respuestas, obviamente para poder entrenar bien a la inteligencia artificial y poder continuar trabajando. Por eso es que estos grupos son muy importantes, porque de verdad que la idea es enviar respuestas con calidad y que nos permitan seguir en las plataformas, porque las respuestas que no sean de calidad, ellos simplemente nos eliminan o simplemente no trabajamos para eso. Por lo que es muy importante estar en estos grupos. Claro, las tareas son individuales, pero todas son semejantes y entre todos nos ayudamos. Cada quien hace su trabajo después de que ya haya entendido bien la respuesta. Y bueno, eso era lo que quería acotar. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. I want to ask briefly to Yasser. Yasser, you were just you just mentioned the hardships of doing this type of work in the Middle East in places ridden by work like Palestine, Syria, Lebanon. So I wanted to know if you are in contact with workers in these places. You also mentioned the special. You also said I want to speak for my colleagues in Lebanon. So I wanted to know if there's a form of organizing happening there.
Yes, like for my case, for Syrian data workers, I believe like kind of 2 years ago, the data workers here in Syria, we kind of make some meetings because we were very frustrated, disappointed about some projects. Most of our work was rejected back then. And we kind of make some union and try to speak for lawyers here in Syria and outside Syria, some of us that they had a contract. And we kind of tried to speak to lawyers inside and outside Syria, but the answer was, since you are in Syria, you can do nothing with your contracts because of the sanction again. And yes, I believe that it's kind of a little bit better for the data workers, Syrian refugees in Lebanon. There are some kind of unions who are helping them. So yes, I believe the situation for data workers in Lebanon is kind of way better than data workers in Syria.
Thanks, Yasser. Are there more questions? Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. My question might be a bit blurry, so I'm very sorry for that. First of all, thanks a lot for the testimonies. Very interesting. The question is about at which extent you feel that those working experiences were recognized on the job market by potential other employers and stuff like this.
I think it's not recognized at all because it's first of all, because there is no regulation. That's the first point. And the second point is that it's not professionalized. And it's like the dark side of the AI. I think that's what we are here for. So that's the point, to professionalize it and to regulate it and to make it visible to the society.
Okay. Also, it depends, but for certain type of tasks, they give you a sort of, I don't know, job title, like the ones that you see on LinkedIn as data linguist, data annotator, or prompt engineer. But outside of those platforms, those job titles mean something completely different. So if you put it in your resume and go to a big tech company and okay, so I know how you structure data and so on, they won't recognize it because it's like a proletariat work. It's on the base of a big scale economy. So, they leverage on many people working on it. And if you're specialized, also a PhD person, no company in AI development would hire you if your only experience is this. I found it the hard way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bueno, en el caso de Latinoamérica y la mía, de las 5 plataformas en las cuales yo trabajo, 4 de ellas en sus contratos de confidencialidad mencionan eso, que no hay que decir que trabajamos con ellos, no hay que mencionar absolutamente nada. Por eso es que solamente menciono la plataforma de Appen, la cual ellos sí no tienen problema con eso, pero las otras ni siquiera puedo mencionar el nombre a las cuales trabajo. Entonces, ahí lo tienen.
I would like to add to this. This is very pervasive in this industry. The NDAs and the secrecy surrounding this industry doesn't allow the workers to add this experience to their CV literally. So in many cases, they cannot name the employer. In other cases, they cannot even name the actual position. They cannot say content moderator. They need to say call center employee or something like that. So yeah, the workers in Germany, they are fighting for this. Also, Germany is a country where professions are very much institutionalized. So there is learnings and certain schools for each profession. They are fighting for to make content moderation one of those officially recognized professions with specific training, with specific threshold for payment and so on. That's one of their main struggles right now, and they are working on that. Any other questions? No? How are we doing on time? Okay, we have officially 5 minutes, unofficially maybe 10. I have a question I wanted to ask to Donatella about, you mentioned, and I think it just was a passing mention, and I want to go back to that. You said you impersonate AI. You work, or one of your many tasks was to pretend to be a chatbot. Did I get that right? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, exactly. Pretending to be a chatbot in following a longer conversation with many terms, like turn speaking. So you write a prompt like if you were a human user, and then you write yourself an answer as if you were a bot, following very strict set of rules. And yes, and you go on, depends on how many conversational turns you have, and that's it. Those are creative writing tasks.
Okay, one follow-up question. So a lot of the discourses around automation or cutting costs are around making this cheaper, right? So it's cheaper, they make it seem like it is cheaper to have a chatbot than to have actual people answering the queries. Now, why would they pretend to have a chatbot and then have human workers? Why do you think that is?
Because those data are manipulated and structured before they are sold to the last employer. So it's not like our final question, like you see, I don't know, the Amazon chatbot in which there is a human person behind, which is much of a customer care. Mm-hmm. That is my second job. So yes. One I am a bot and the other one I am a human. Yes. So customer care as a human. In this case, they do not even pretend that there is a human behind, because it is used only for reinforcement learning. So they structure a set of data that gives positive feedback to the bots, which are based on cognitive extractive work from underpaid laborers.
That's a great way to put it. I have one final question to Yasser. Oh, sorry, Antonio, yes.
Sorry, ok. Questa te la chiedo in italiano, perché è troppo, come dire, è troppo interessante. Da diversi anni intervisto persone in tutto il mondo che fanno lavoro di impersonazione o imitazione di AI. Nel 2017 ho intervistato per la prima volta una persona in Francia che faceva finta di essere un'intelligenza artificiale. Nel 2022 ne ho intervistate in Africa che facevano finta di essere un'intelligenza artificiale. La sola differenza che vedo tra te e loro è che nel 2024 in Italia queste stesse aziende che ti danno da realizzare questa microtask ti forniscono anche un quadro concettuale per spiegarla. Nel senso che nel 2017 ti posso assicurare che sia in Africa che in Francia dicevano no, io sto facendo una falsa intelligenza artificiale. è falsa, non c'è intelligenza artificiale, non c'è algoritmo, non c'è modello, non c'è IA. Adesso la faccenda è praticamente come puoi, che sicurezza ti danno queste aziende o queste piattaforme che in realtà le tue false risposte siano poi utilizzate per una vera IA, oppure stanno semplicemente utilizzandole. Uno di questi giorni magari io chiedo una cosa a ChatGPT e sei tu che mi rispondi in realtà. Come possiamo esserne sicuri?
Ti rispondo in italiano perché mi viene più comodo in questo caso. Secondo me dipende da quanto un lavoratore o una lavoratrice sono capaci a individuare qual è il cliente finale in base alla commessa. Qua è il trick. Per cui questo progetto qua so di per certo che ha un certo cliente finale che ha avuto problemi con risposte automatizzate su certi temi su cui aveva bisogno di una grandissima mole di dati, cioè consideriamo che hanno bisogno di una mole di lavoratori per ogni singola lingua nazionale e quindi magari hanno visto che con l'italiano c'erano problemi sui temi, facciamo un esempio, di media e spettacolo che mi sono capitati spesso, tipo che andava a cercare su fonti dove c'erano bufale o siti di gossip che nessuno in realtà si leggeva. No, tu vammi a cercare le pagine corrette, impersonifica il bot e elaboralo come fosse un bot. In quel caso vedi proprio il riscontro diretto. Poi quei dati sono manipolati, estrapolati, però è alquanto improbabile che un utente finale che scrive al bot riceva una risposta paro paro. Penso che venga anche tipo fatto NLP, quindi tagliate, spezzettate a livello di sintassi.
Thank you so much, Donatella. I want to go back to Yasser very briefly to ask you, so Yasser, you spoke of on the one hand, of your work as a data worker, on the other hand, of the danger of AI being misused for warfare, for surveillance. Can you speak a little bit? I was missing a little bit of the link between your actual work and that final creation. Can you elaborate on that link? Maybe also speak of, are you afraid that your labor will be used for that, for the same technologies that are basically used to bomb your house? So that's my question.
Yeah, yes, of course. We do not want that our job used to harm people, and we are talking about harming our people. I know some of the data workers, Syrian refugees in Lebanon. They work in some of these images, like kind of destroyed places, and you have to label something there. But yes, maybe we need to know that these data is not going to be trained AI to kill people and destroy places.
Is there a way to know, to make sure that that data is not going to be used for that? Do you have a way to know?
Usually, no. We do not know how the data is collected in the first place to know how they are going to be using it.
Yes. Thank you very much, Yasser. Thank you very much, everyone. Again, highlighting how brave the people who are here today are. So I would like to ask for a round of applause for them. And I would like to invite Antonio, who's going to chair the next session with Crystal and Dylan as speakers. Thank you very much.
Just in case if you want coffee or tea, it's just here at the entrance.
Yes. A little recess for coffee. I think that probably it was supposed to be. It's necessary. So. So, I hope that now you're all caffeinated, as you should, at this moment of the afternoon. We have this final session, which will be somehow counterpart to the previous one. I'm here surrounded by organizers and workers. You will discover who is whom very soon. And this final session is actually about possible paths forward. Antidotes, regulation, strategies and tactics to, well, come out of the situations we are observing. The bad news from the start is that we have been observing these situations for a number of years already. If you think about the first time where Amazon Mechanical Turk was mentioned in a patent, it was 2001, 23 years ago. And we are still dealing with the results of that. And you will soon discover that me mentioning Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is probably the most well-known platform where microtasks are performed, is not by chance, because I want to introduce first and foremost Crystal Kaufman, who is the lead organizer at Turkopticon. Turkopticon is an NGO, a non-profit organization devoted to protecting the rights of data workers all around the world, and the origin of Turkopticon, as the name suggests very heavily, was Amazon Mechanical Turk. Over the years, there have been some changes and transformations, and the scope has changed and evolved and developed. And so with Crystal, we'll have the chance to discuss what organizers do about, well, the situation that we have described, not only in Europe, but all around the world. It is also important to stress the fact that both Crystal and Dylan Baker are members and researchers at the DARE Institute. Well, the DARE is actually Distributed Artificial Intelligence Research Institute. Help me out with acronyms, I'm very bad. Anyway, renowned and well-known organization that has been extremely active, and they both have a role also in a burgeoning field, which is the field of the ethics of AI. For instance, Crystal received an award for the Rising Star in AI Ethics 2024, and about Dylan, this is my way of introducing him, is that he serves on the board of directors for Women in AI Ethics. And the important part is that Dylan has a double life, or what I must say, I don't know. The French would say double hat, which, or at least a shady past, one might say, because he used to be a former Google research software engineer in machine learning. So he used to be on the dark side. And then he is now with us. And he is now with us, I can tell you, not as a representative of Google. We decided, and it was a clear choice, not to give voice to these companies that are overrepresented. We only hear their version of the story. We are now here not only to hear the other version of the story, or the other sound of the other bell, which of course is the voice of the workers, but also the voice of the organizers and of people who are doing something about it. So, if you allow me, Crystal, I would like to start with Dylan. And let's start exactly on this role that you used to have, and how do you envision, or how do you look at data work now, and how you used to look at data work when you were in the belly of the whale in Google?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I started, the first time I ever worked with machine learning was 2011 or 2012, so like very early in the machine learning world. And, you know, I was working in a research lab in a really small setting in neurology, and we were, you know, labeling all of our own data. And that was just sort of how things worked. Data sets were much, much smaller. There wasn't really a sense of like, at least I had no perception of this as a category of work. And like going through formal schooling in machine learning, it was also labels, and this is like a pattern, labeling was first considered just labeling, and second considered this like sort of background process. It was just something that sort of happened. You just had labeled data or you had unlabeled data, and that was sort of taken as a given. It was only once I started in industry that I even sort of gained an awareness that this was a thing at all. And I think the reason that I started to really like immediately dig into the ethical considerations, first is because I wanted to work in ethics of machine learning, and second was because it was one of the first things I was tasked with as a like young machine learning engineer, very new. It was like, okay, we need to label all of this data so that we can do other things. And the important work for me was to do all of these other things. And so running the labeling tasks was just sort of almost like a menial task that a lot of junior engineers were given. And I found it very strange, like asking questions like, who's doing this work? Like the task we were doing was very subjective. So I was like, okay, well, you know, I'm suddenly the like secondhand boss of a team of 8 people who I learned later were in Hyderabad. You know, I can only talk to their manager, and I feel like, you know, I'm a kid, like I'm so new here, you know, and it felt very weird. And as I started to ask more questions, it was erased the same way it was erased in schools. The other researchers were just like, this is not, you know, this isn't important. This isn't a good use of your time. This isn't going to help your career. Like, why do we care? Or sort of abstract away the like, you know, this is just how it gets done. But since entering the space, now doing research in this area and having worked on this problem for a long time, like it makes there's a lot of historical precedents in the history of machine learning that it makes sense that this work is invisibilized. And then, yeah, I thought about it also as I was organizing at Google that like, even as the conversations about building worker solidarity centered people who are working in our building, people who like, you know, building maintenance, it still didn't extend oftentimes to data work as a thing that existed at all. Very rambling.
Not at all. And actually, you provide the good bridge to what Crystal does in terms of organizing, because you mentioned, and we will come back to that, the fact that the moment you raised, you gained awareness of this was also the moment where you were organizing inside Google. And so let's talk about organizing. What can we say about an organization like Turkopticon? And do you, for instance, at the moment, describe yourself as an actual union, or to what extent? To what extent we can? How can we apprehend what you do, basically?
First of all, I just want to say thank you to Antonio and to Leila and to Mila. As far as Turkopticon is concerned, I can start with that right away. Not a union. Actually, we find that most workers actually don't really want a union, which is interesting given what's happening in Africa with the content moderators. We do operate as an advocacy organization, and we're bringing workers in and building a community to build worker power. We are worker-run and worker-led, so we are all data workers. That's where I started. I started on Amazon Mechanical Turk when I had no other options in the middle of an illness. And from there, we're just stepping into away from what Turkopticon started as, which was the very first forum where workers could communicate with one another about tasks they completed, whether they were good, whether the requester was good, whether they were bad, into this organization where we're trying to bring workers in, letting them know they're not alone, that there is strength in numbers, and that if we do work together, we can work to improve conditions.
So, to an extent, one might say that the origin story of Turkopticon resembles a lot some of those informal forums that, for instance, Oscarina was mentioning, that sometimes are on Facebook or on WhatsApp today, but at the time were not.
Yes, very much actually. Turkopticon began as an academic project roughly about 15 years ago, and it was a purpose just for workers to be able to, I mean, not really communicate with each other, but to be able to read these reviews and leave these reviews. And it was the first time workers really could communicate with one another and realized they weren't the only ones sitting in their houses doing this type of work. And now it's growing into this community. So I've seen with Facebook groups, because I started doing data work in 2015, I'm a little bit older, so I go back to Facebook. We saw workers come together there and start not necessarily organizing, but coming together and sharing tips and helping one another and kind of building a sense of community. So I think with these new groups that Oscarina was talking about, I think we're going to see these evolve as well into something a little bit more. That's my hope, at least.
Provided that the platforms do not bash these groups, which happens systematically. Okay. No, do you want to say something on that? No, not specific. Okay. Hopefully not. It's just it's not something that we wish for. But talking about bashing, even in the previous session, you have noticed that the positions, even the political positions that data workers take towards unions are complex. Sometimes they are conflictual. And for instance, the German TELUS workers had a couple of things to say about a specific German union. It is also true that unions, established unions, included in Spain, included in Italy and in France, they are trying to keep up. And it's also our role to show them the way. So talking about showing them the way, let's go back to your experience, Dylan, with the AWU, that's the exact name, so it's Alphabet Workers Union, which apart from your own experience, it's important to stress that it's one of the rare tech workers, and especially a lot of engineers in that union, that insists on creating solidarity with the data workers. And this is something that probably, I don't know if it develops over time or if it was there since the beginning. What was your experience within a union?
So my experience was also somewhat limited because of the timing. I learned of the union a few months before before it went public through organizing friends, and then very shortly after it went public, or just before it went public, my manager was fired very publicly, and so there was it was a very sort of dramatic time. But and then I have been separate from the union since leaving shortly after. But during that period, I think the intention, and people have different opinions on the execution, but the intention was very much to create a union that represented as wide a net as possible, as wide a net of people who were employed by Google or in contact with Google in as broad a definition as possible. So that was, folks who everyone from building maintenance through, any engineer or something like that. So I think it was really challenging because, at least in the spaces I was in, almost everyone I was talking to was a full-time employee. Those, I think, were the folks who I saw leading a lot of the spaces, the conversations. Those, maybe this was just my position, but I think it has really struggled with the sort of domination of the voices of the people who are most powerful otherwise, which is a common refrain. And so I think, I struggle to see or I would really love to see a union like that be making an impact in the sort of work of data worker organizing, but I just don't see it happening right now.
Okay. Oops, I wonder to what extent, but this is a question for both of you, actually. This is a US perspective, because Crystal was mentioning, and we have already mentioned, for instance, the African Content Moderation Union, and we actually had a representative of that union here in the same room a few months ago, Kauna Magli, and she was not only delivering her own experience or relating her own experience, but also explaining what is the path forward. And the path forward in places like Kenya or Nigeria, Namibia, and also in some places around Europe and South America goes through traditional unionism. So I don't want to ask the question in a provocative way. So what's with the U.S. and the unions? But how can we make sense of this difference from one country to another, talking about the same type of labor?
So in the US, you'll find the highest paid data workers in the world. Typically, there's pay disparity. And what happens is when workers start to organize, like in many other fields, sometimes companies will pack up and go somewhere else. If we unionize in the United States, the fear is that the work will pack up and leave and go to another country. And there are many, many other options and many places where, despite the pay disparity, people will gladly take the work and the lower pay. And so that's what we're up against.
Okay, that's right. Okay, this was just one way to address the topic of unionism. I think that this is also important to stress the fact that if we think about the incredible work that Leila Shaibi has been doing and all our colleagues, initially about platform work, a lot of the platform workers that were involved in the forum on Uberization here at the European Parliament over the years were people that were working on local platforms, location-based platforms, like, again, Uber or a delivery platform, logistics platform. And they had an incredibly developed sense of their own, their own paths to organization. And sometimes they just started working with traditional unions. But it is true, and this is my way to introducing the next topic, that we have other strategies. We have other ways of having these voices heard, these rights respected. So what, in your opinion, are the specific ways that are developed within the data workers' environment and ecosystem in terms of protecting their rights and having their voices heard?
I think organizations like Turkopticon, organizations that bring workers together, give workers tools, give workers collective power. I think that's the way this needs to start. And what I envision is we have these organizations spread around the world. There's Digital Labor, there's the African Content Moderators Union, there's Turkopticon, there's all these organizations. And why aren't we working together? Why aren't we doing this right now and creating a global standard and saying enough is enough, fair pay, equal treatment, and no longer hide this type of labor and all advocate for the exact same thing. And that way the work isn't going to pack up and leave and go somewhere else because we're all going to be on the same page.
I think on the requester engineer machine learning side of things, I think also there are a lot of people who are sympathetic, or I think would be sympathetic. Like, I think there is a especially growing amount of energy on the side of like wanting to be in solidarity, not wanting to be exploitative, or at the very least like trying to be very generous. I think a lot more people would act differently if some of these barriers were broken down. I think companies intentionally put a lot of layers of abstraction to sort of decrease solidarity and empathy and sort of decrease the likelihood that, for example, someone like me who was, very junior at the time could be like, we need to change, like, I'm not willing to do this, or like, I'm not willing to do this if I don't know how much people are being paid. I like, you know, I want to impose these standards on how we collect our data. I think it's very much, yeah, pushed away. And I think if we had mechanisms, not only in the actual practice and industry and in research, I think the same kinds of things play out in academia. But I think having that also sort of throughout the education pipeline, like there are so many different ways in which, like, at the very least, we could break down some of the barriers to having any solidarity. Although I think first and foremost, like, because this is often, like, I do not think that's where we should start, and I don't think that's where a majority of the energy should go. I think a majority of the energy and resourcing should be in worker solidarity and putting towards the actual workers organizing, because without that, you know, people being sympathetic means nothing. It just makes them feel better.
Just adding on to what Dylan said, some of these platforms, and I'm speaking, my main experiences with Amazon Mechanical Turk, I've worked with other platforms, but that's what I draw from the most. The separation of requesters, the companies, academic researchers, and workers it's by design. It was put in as an us versus them and pitted workers against those who requested the work. So instead of working together, it's been this constant awful relationship or lack of relationship. So I think if we can work on bettering that the requester isn't necessarily the enemy. Sure, there are some bad ones, but we're working on that too. That we need to work with these companies, with these academic requesters, and we're going to get further working together than having this constant conflict.
I think also, like, I think there, like, it didn't have to be this way, and it didn't used to be this way. Like, I think in the very beginning, like, before there was the infrastructure for machine learning to have the amount of money and the focus on scale, before the, like, big data thing started, right? Like, labeling data sets is something that, like, researchers did, or maybe, like, students were doing. Like, it was something that was collaborative. It was, like, you know, this was just sort of how it had to get done. We're all working on the same project, and that still happens in, like, specialized fields, for example. Like, it happens on small scale things. And I think, like, there were a lot of factors that shifted into the system that we see now, but, like, we have very recent evidence that it does not have to function that way, and that these things can be considered sort of on an equal playing field. But a lot of things are entrenching it the way that it is now.
I want to go back to the standard and standards. You both have mentioned them, but in a minute, I just wanted, before I do, to ask Dylan a question about the fact that there is, according to you, a growing number of engineers who want to be inclusive and want to be respectful of the rights and the human dignity of these workers. I wonder to what extent, in your opinion, this is a generational thing. In my experience, as an older guy, surrounded by even older guys, engineers, I mean, I do not see a lot of sympathy. I remember very distinctly an episode of my life, not one of the best, to be frank, a conversation with an engineer, a machine learning scientist for a big company that I won't name, IBM, that basically said to me, plain and simple, I don't want to deal with data workers. They are just, I quote, the little Indians who clean up, swipe up the corners after I have finished. Which was, I mean, so wrong in so many ways in terms of, well, okay, you see where I'm going. Basically, to what extent, in your opinion, this is a generational thing, and to what extent, in your opinion, this is also something that this solidarity can also be created with the previous generations, or people who are in senior position now, people that are, you know, still inside Google because they were not fired to also.
There's a lot there. Also just a minor point. Yeah, I've heard some of the most ridiculous racist stuff coming from all sorts of people who otherwise consider themselves, you know, with a lot of decorum, referring to data work. And I don't know to what extent it's generational or different sort of, you know, social currents. Like, I think you could ask that about a lot of different social tides that turn and why people think the way that they think. I definitely noticed for sure a lot of this, the same pattern you see a lot of places. It's a lot of younger people, otherwise marginalized people who, want to be in solidarity with others who are marginalized in other ways. So like I was part of it was called at the time the Human Computation Ethics Working Group within Google. That was a lot of mostly researchers who were like, how do we do this better? How do we brainstorm within Google what we can change in terms of policies or, even just what we can do on individual projects? And it was, it was a lot of the people who are otherwise working on ethics at Google, which was a minority for sure. I think, it's really hard talking to, I talked myself blue, like trying to talk to more senior established people about these issues, and my, career suffered because of it. Like I faced a lot of pushback by people who viewed it as a distraction. And I think unfortunately when there's a lot of money and status to be made in maintaining these views and maintaining that like superiority and maintaining the norms, right? The way that we're taught, even, looking at models of like, reinforcement learning with human feedback, you'll see, a nice little diagram of how all of the different pieces fit together, and an entire, just one little technical block is human feedback, which is a whole, field. So I struggle with this too. I think it's really hard. I don't think there's an easy answer.
So let's talk about standards. And again, you, Crystal, mentioned the fact that all these organizations are popping up, or they've been existing over a long period of time, should come together, come up with common global standards. What does it look like, in your opinion? And the sub-question is, how is this related to also regulation? Because it's of course, it is a grassroots effort. It is a workers-led effort, but policymakers and regulation probably have a role to play there.
I think that policymakers and legislation can certainly make this easier for us. That would help. Right now, there's this feeling of going it alone. We're out there, we're a group of workers, researchers, trying to make this better, but policy would obviously push us forward. I think that's an important piece, and hopefully we'll see more of that. I'm sorry, the first part.
The standards, what do they look like?
So when I look to the future and my dream world, I would love to see an environment where data workers and researchers are collaborating and working together. Data workers are treated as the experts that they are in the data that they generate and help maintain. Pay would be equal no matter where you're living. Equal work, equal pay. There would be an equal division of work instead of living in an area where you only have 5 jobs available and people in the United States have 300. That can be equalized as well. I think those folks who are working with disturbing content, and there's some horrifying content out there that people see, mental health care needs to be on the table and a priority for these workers. I could go on and run us completely out of time, so I will turn it back to you. But I think all of this, most importantly, it's possible. We can do it. It's just going to take everybody.
You want it now? I just want to just invite you to develop even further on a specific aspect that was mentioned by Mila, because it's one of the biggest and most remarkable outcome of our research here in the Encore project is surveillance and algorithmic management. So can you speak a little to that, please?
Yeah, this being managed by algorithms, this is really difficult. At Turkopticon, we help workers get their accounts back when they are unfairly suspended, and oftentimes it's due to a glitch. It could be a faulty algorithm that suspends their account, interrupts their ability to earn money, pay their bills. We need to look at this. We need to get rid of the surveillance that is present in a lot of these platforms because it creates stress and it creates health problems for people. It's an unhealthy environment and it's not okay. When you look at traditional jobs, other fields are not surveilled constantly. So why are data workers surveilled like this? It shouldn't be this way. We need to see something change here.
Okay, let's start let's talk about something that can be considered a positive development in the field, because again, our tendency towards loom and gloom can lead us to very dystopic scenarios. Dylan, in your opinion, what is the most exciting initiative or set of initiatives that are popping up in the larger data workers ecosystems, best practices or interesting experiments or initiatives?
Oh man, I spend so much time on the doom and gloom side. I wish I had better answers for you. And there may be things that I miss. I mean, I don't know, not to plug Mila's work and everyone's work, but I think the data workers inquiry is really, really exciting, and I think it's really unique. I think
should explain what it is.
The data workers inquiry being a project that is centering the voices of data workers, which is the first of its kind in this area, to sort of drive this work forward. Because there have been projects before that have been pushing for better standards for this work for many, many years. And those have been almost unilaterally parachuting in, interviewing, different data workers, different times, taking that information, and then writing up reports and talking to other people about it, and always removing the voices of the workers. And that just, as many, small wins as those have had, right? I don't want to totally trash all of that work. There are many earnest people behind it. There's just only so far you can go without being led by workers. And I think the data workers inquiry is really deeply refreshing, I think, and completely necessary. So yeah, that's the thing I'm the most excited about.
Yeah, you want to, no, please.
Yeah, I want to echo what Dylan said. I am so lucky to be working on that project alongside Mila and Askarina and Yasser and so many other amazing people, and it has provided a perspective that has been long missing. And I, again, not to sit here and plug work, but I really encourage you to check it out because it's what's going to drive all of this forward.
Enough with the plugging. No, I'm joking. Probably the most important part that just to have everybody on board is to explain that the data workers inquiry is an initiative that many of the people present here are involved into, and basically it consists in providing the opportunity for workers, data workers, to, well, be their own voice, be their own media. And the DW, the Data Workers Inquiry, provides them with, training or even resources to tell their story in their own way. Some people do comic books, some people do documentaries. Yasser mentioned a documentary that he himself produced. Some do podcasts, some do illustration. Help me out. Anyway, a zine, yes, a variety of, again, a variety of media. So it's extremely entertaining, let's put it like this. It's not if you look at the content, because sometimes, again, we are back in the doom and gloom, but it is an important effort to not only give voice, but also to provide them with tools to have this voice heard. Now, another interesting, to me, strategy that has been ongoing over the years is, for instance, thinking about alternatives to capitalist platforms. For instance, recently in Mombasa, in Kenya, there was a big platform cooperativism conference, and this has been going on for several years. I think that's the 5th edition of that conference. So what can we say about platform cooperativism, but not with, cooperatives of delivery workers, but cooperatives of data workers?
I think this is really exciting as a technologist. I don't know. I think this, like, I always go back to the point when talking about technological development that, like, context comes first. The tech is just, we're building tools to do something as people. We just want to achieve some goal, and we can come up with new ways to achieve that. And I think, like, we are so, not only sort of, we're so limited by keeping a very narrow range of voices and perspectives and goals at the table and sort of hoarding resources in that direction to dictate what we think technology should and could look like and what problems we think are interesting and how resources should be spent. I think the idea of cooperatives that sort of balance out power and allow a wide variety of people to future make would, and like sort of legislative forces that sort of precipitate that kind of thing, that like make that possible. I don't know, sort of losing my train of thought here. I think that's like what is the future and what is the most exciting. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't have much to add on this, but I will say that there has been some talk of worker-run platforms to bring that experience in and design it in a specific way right from the beginning. To me, that's very exciting. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I would love to see it. I would love to see it happen.
Okay, I just want to open the floor to a larger conversation with the audience, with the other workers, with Leila Shaibi and Milagros Micheli. So we have a few minutes, and if you have questions about things that we did cover or did not cover, this is the moment. The floor is yours. Leila.
Ben, merci beaucoup pour tous ces témoignages. Ouais. Merci beaucoup pour tous ces témoignages. Moi, j'ai quelques remarques et à la fin, j'ai une question. Peut-être dire que, évidemment, nous, ici, on est au Parlement européen. Donc, notre travail en tant que parlementaire européen, c'est de faire des lois européennes, des directives européennes. Donc, ça tombe bien de parler des besoins en termes de régulation. Juste dire que ce qu'il y a déjà, donc, c'est la directive sur les travailleurs des plateformes. Et au moment des négociations, le Parlement européen, parce que vous savez qu'une directive se négocie entre le Parlement européen, il y a des négociations internes, bon, ensuite le Parlement européen a une position, la négocier avec le Conseil qui représente les États et qui avait une position beaucoup plus compliquée, et la Commission européenne. La question de est-ce qu'on inclut ou pas les travailleurs du clic, les micro-workers, s'est posée pendant les négociations. Malheureusement, ça n'a pas été inclus explicitement dans la directive. La directive, nous, on souhaitait, mon groupe politique et le Parlement européen dans son ensemble, souhaitaient qu'il soit fait état dans la directive pour les travailleurs des plateformes, qui impose le principe de présomption de salariat. Les travailleurs doivent être présumés salariés et donc avoir accès aux droits de n'importe quel salarié à partir du moment où ils sont subordonnés par la voie d'un algorithme. Le Parlement souhaitait qu'il soit explicitement fait mention des micro-workers. Ça n'a pas été le cas, point négatif. Point positif, dans la définition des plateformes, on a évité une définition qui excluait les micro-workers. Donc je pense que là, la directive, il faut qu'elle soit transposée, donc traduite, en loi nationale dans les 27 États membres de l'Union européenne. Ça va être l'objet d'un rapport de force. La bataille n'est pas terminée parce que, telle qu'elle est rédigée, il y a encore possibilité pour certains États, et notamment en premier lieu, malheureusement, la France, qui a été le plus gros adversaire aux droits des travailleurs. Bon, je ne vais pas les détails, mais il va y avoir besoin d'un rapport de force pour transposer cette directive et pour faire en sorte qu'elle soit la plus progressiste possible pour les travailleurs. Mais je pense que dans tous les cas, même si on a une transposition à minima, les garde-fous qu'il y a à l'intérieur font que ça pourrait être un outil à utiliser. Malheureusement, ce sera un outil à utiliser devant les tribunaux. malheureusement, même si on l'aurait souhaité, je ne pense pas objectivement qu'on aura quelque chose qui, du jour au lendemain, obligera à ce que les travailleurs, les micro-workers deviennent salariés. Hein. Je ne vais pas mentir à ce sujet. Mais ça pourrait être un outil devant les tribunaux. Dans les autres choses qu'il y a dans les tiroirs, à l'agenda de l'Union européenne pour la prochaine mandature, une directive sur les risques psychosociaux. Et moi, quand je vous entends, je pense qu'il va falloir qu'on utilise les négociations autour de cette directive sur les risques psychosociaux. Pour l'instant, elles n'ont pas débuté, on en est au stade 0. Hein. Mais à mon avis, qu'on est bien en tête d'inclure les choses que j'ai notées sur l'obligation de suivi psychologique et toutes les choses que vous avez développées. L'inclure, c'est l'occasion aussi à ce moment-là. Et donc, troisième chose qui est aussi dans les tiroirs, c'est pas encore officiel, mais on pense qu'il y a raisonnablement des informations qu'on a de la Commission européenne, parce que, vous savez, le Parlement européen, malheureusement, n'a pas ce qu'on appelle le droit d'initiative législative. Moi, si je veux écrire une directive, je peux pas. Il faut que je pousse la Commission européenne à proposer d'abord. Mais on sait que sur la directive sur le management algorithmique, c'est quelque chose, c'est que la Commission européenne a en tête. Et là aussi, à mon avis, il faudra bien qu'on ait en tête, ce ne sera pas une directive sur les micro-workers, mais que pour ces différents outils qu'on aura, comment on fait en sorte d'inclure tout ce que vous avez dit. Et c'est vrai que ce qu'on a vu sur la directive sur les travailleurs des plateformes, c'est que l'implication dans le chantier législatif, c'est aussi un outil d'organisation. En fait, c'est aussi un prétexte. Ce qui s'est passé pour donc les travailleurs des plateformes livreurs et VTC, c'est que le fait que tous ces travailleurs de tous les pays, de Slovénie, d'Italie, d'Espagne, de France, soient réunis ici, à Bruxelles, et des interprètes comme ça, et donc puissent échanger entre eux grâce aux interprètes, et viennent donner leur avis sur ce qu'il fallait mettre dans la directive, ça a servi au processus parlementaire, mais ça a aussi servi à l'auto-organisation. Et donc, à votre disposition, en tout cas, pour être utilisé pour votre auto-organisation, pour aider à votre organisation. Ce qu'on a vu, effectivement, c'est que, au départ, les syndicats aussi, sur les travailleurs des plateformes visibles, étaient frileux, qu'il a fallu généralement, les premières formes d'organisation collective, elles se sont faites en dehors des cadres syndicaux, donc plutôt sous forme de collectif. Et puis petit à petit, les syndicats se sont dit, oulala, attends, au départ, ça ne nous concerne pas, parce que de toute façon, ce n'est pas des travailleurs, ce n'est pas des salariés, c'est des entreprises, c'est des indépendants. Et petit à petit, il y a une prise de conscience et un consensus, en fait, sur le fait que les syndicats devaient s'emparer de la question. Et j'espère que ce sera le cas aussi sur la question des travailleurs, des data workers. Et moi, j'avais une question. C'est quand on parle d'apprentissage machine, en fait. J'ai bien compris que donc il y a besoin de l'humain pour l'apprentissage machine, mais on parle beaucoup en ce moment d'IA générative. Et je voulais avoir votre avis sur est-ce qu'une fois que l'humain a fait son travail, a appris la machine, a fait son travail en termes de comment j'entraîne la machine, est-ce que vous pensez qu'il y aura toujours besoin d'humain ou que non, en fait, ce sera autosuffisant et
If we only received $5 for every time we are asked this question, but yes.
Okay.
That is a great question that comes up all the time. And I think it's very good marketing on the part of these tech companies to promote the idea that you could ever remove the role of people. Even for generative AI systems, right? Like, most of the early stages of what they create is sort of garbage in order to be contextualized, fine-tuned, deployed in a particular environment. You still need tons of human feedback, even tasks like, do you prefer this output or that? Or like, which one of these sounds more compelling? Like all of that fine-tuning all comes from people. And while there are there's this problem that's actually happening on the internet right now where the internet is filling up with generative AI content, which as generative AI systems crawl the internet and ingest all this data, they put it back into the training and it becomes this endless cycle where models break down, they stop working. And so even though I sort of oppose the larger model direction that we're going, it's like very environmentally destructive, like very there are so many reasons it's deeply unsustainable, including worker exploitation. even if you wanted to go that direction, models will sort of eat themselves and collapse if you don't have a ton of human input kind of at every step along the way. So as long as you want a context and a deployment and you want it to do something new, you need people to be giving feedback and shaping it and constantly updating.
One of the things that I always say when people bring this question up is that language is a living, breathing thing, and it is constantly changing. We have new words every day. We have new slang every day. We take words out of our language. They mean something different. And generative AI is never going to be able to do that on its own. We are always going to need the human input on that.
So, as the French would say, we are not out of the hostel. On n'est pas sorti d'auberge. Anyway, so anyways, this is actually very important. I want to go back to what Leila was highlighting, is that the regulatory framework is, as of now, extremely fragmented in a place like this. And we are not probably in a good situation where eventually we will have one specific directive that specifically addresses data workers. But we do have existing tools, like, again, the Platform Workers Directive that Leila managed to the extent that the Parliament, the European Parliament, had an important role in it. And there is the new directive on psychosocial risks, the new directive on algorithmic management. I would like to add there is also, I already mentioned it, the due diligence directive that was approved, was adopted in 2024, which is important to take into account not only the local and micro individual elements, impacts of this work, but also the supply chain side of it. The fact that this work doesn't stop because there is a frontier, and so this. But the problem again is how are European countries, specifically, given the rules of policy making in Europe, how are European countries receptive to this kind of directives? Because, of course, the directive is, when it is adopted, largely a wishful thinking, unless it is transposed into law in each country. And a lot of surprises and a lot of bad ones can happen, sometimes even good. So this also means that this fragmentation is also due to the fact that countries have their role to play and their word to say about it.
Thanks a lot. Once again, it was very interesting. I am slightly concerned, and this concern might come from a lack of knowledge, hence my question. For me, for what I understood, microworkers were particularly important for the question of alignment of AI when it comes to training and to align the objective, the final objective, both ethically and in terms of overall objective of AI. Microworkers were important, but you mentioned multiple times that there is a relatively, if not a strong disregard of those people by the engineers. This is very problematic, at which extent the microworkers, the lack of regard and also of not management is not the word that I'm trying to go with, but training, like information that they get can affect on a long-term alignment of the AI that are created, because
No, I think that's a big concern. I think that one of the biggest problems is not only was this field sort of established on norms, like it was set up to fail. It was established on norms of sort of, we know we don't have perfect data, but we'll use the data that we have, and it's probably close enough. And that happens over and over and over again until, we don't, have a sort of sense from the beginning that it's sort of one particular kind of biased data set labeled by people whose identities have been stripped away from an understanding of the data, and then that model was attached to this other thing. So it's cascading, and it goes all the way down to the bottom. And now on the other end, there are all sorts of papers and initiatives and lines of research trying to sort of like debias or unbias or like neutralize, which I think is also, I just want to plug being wary of, because I think a lot of people are pitching like, well, okay, we like built this on, 17 different layers of bias and particular worldviews and particular sort of norms that have shaped this to be everything but neutral. And now we're going to sort of apply some layer at the top that's going to make it neutral or ethical or even in some particular idea of alignment. And it's so deeply foundational that there is no view from nowhere. There is no neutrality to begin with, right? And like, this is, to even try to set that as a goal, I think is problematic. But I think, I don't know if this answers the question, but I think, the idea of alignment towards a particular goal should always be taken in very specific contexts.
I also have a question. Thank you very much as well. I know it's difficult to say this specifically in the parliament, but I think I find two issues in pushing so much as society for the regulation. One is that regulation, we've seen it with the Platform Work Directive and everything, it takes very long. And particularly it takes very long when you need to implement it and negotiate it among 27 member states, social partners, etc. So I think as human beings and as society, we need to find alternative measures to maybe find our rights protected while the regulation takes place, because maybe when it's implemented or enters into force, a new type of data work comes up that is not included now in the definition part of the directive. So this was one of the comments with regards to regulation. And the second one, maybe also from an American, if you can bring it to the table with your experiences, I think there's a lenience towards deregulation today. We've seen it in the US. I think from what I've been reading, there's voices that with the new government in the United States, the AI Safety Institute will be dismantled or they will change. So I think we are also as a society, it seems like we are pushing for a deregulation. So I wanted to take your approach on the deregulation phase, and also what are the alternatives for us as society to have our rights protected until an upper regulation is implemented. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I really would like to invite to be brief, because I want to make sure that our gracious and great interpreters can go back to their own lives. And so this will be the final question. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. Regulation takes an extremely long time. Starting with advising and even forming something, it takes a very long time. In the US, it takes a long time. I think that's where we have to come together globally to set some standards within the industry itself. And you're also right when you mentioned the US and the deregulation. I think we're in for, shall I say, some interesting times, and we're going to have to see what happens with that. But this is going to be new and challenging. But I think we'll rise to the challenge.
Yeah, a tendency towards deregulation is a really gracious way of putting the direction we're headed. But no, I think what Crystal said, I think the like sort of grassroots, the WhatsApp groups and the Facebook groups and the sort of self-organizing and coming together, those connections feel foundational in all areas, including this one.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Crystal. I really want to thank you again, Leila Shaibi and Milagros Micheli, but especially I want to thank Yasser Al-Reyes, Oscarina Fuentes, Nacho Barros y Daniela Donatella del Piano for the incredible honor that they made us for being with us, and the incredible courage that in some cases it takes to come here in a very public place and to, well, tell their stories in a situation where a lot of elements converge towards them being silenced. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening in vibrant Brussels.
Un grand merci à tous et je propose qu'on prenne, we take a picture all together. Eh bien, merci et merci à toutes celles et ceux qui sont venus assister à cet événement et également à ceux qui ont suivi en ligne. Et puis, bien sûr, encore un immense merci à vous toutes et tous, les travailleurs, pour votre venue. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a los trabajadores. Lila, muchas gracias por invitarnos.
Pero a ti también. A ti también. Sí, 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 sí.